Welcome to meeting number 34 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So that you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Please select your preference now. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. And when you are not speaking, please make sure that your microphone is on mute. As is my normal practice, I will hold up a yellow card for when you have 30 seconds left in your intervention. I will hold up a red card for when your time for questions has expired. Please keep your screen in gallery view so that you can actually see me waving the card. And as today we have a tight schedule due to votes, I will ask that you please respect the time allocated to you. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on November 5th, 2020, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology is meeting today to begin a study on the economic green recovery from COVID-19. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses. We have Mr. Brian O'Callaghan, lead of the Economic Recovery Project, Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment at the University of Oxford, Ms. Christina Frank, Executive Director of Canadian Association Affairs and Exhibitions, Mr. Dave Carey, Vice President, Government and Industry Relations from Canadian Canola Growers Association, Monsieur Daniel Breton, Président et CEO, Electric Mobility Canada, Priyanka Lloyd, Executive Director, Green Economy Canada, and from the Toronto Community Benefits Network, Ms. Rosemary Powell, Executive Director, and Kumza Baker, Campaigns Director. Each witness will present for up to 5 minutes, followed by rounds of questions. With that, we will start with Professor O'Callaghan. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chair, and thank you to the Standing Committee for the humbling invitation to testify. I'm speaking today in my role as lead of the Oxford University Economic Recovery Project here at the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment in Oxford. Put simply, periods of economic downturn, like we've just seen, are the most poignant opportunities for economic rebirth. It's at these moments that governments have the greatest license and indeed the greatest imperative to intervene in their market systems. Right now, we have an opportunity to reshape the future of our countries to grow more and to do so equitably and sustainably. The question is, in recovery, will we prioritize the industries of the past, those that are clearly on the decline and where we are losing competitiveness, or the industries of the future in which we can build long-term competitive advantage and enduring prosperity? Our work at Oxford has considered primarily the economic characteristics of different policy options available to governments in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And on this basis, we advise leaders of nations, development agencies, and businesses around the world. In short, we found that policies that support a transition to a clean, more equitable, and often more digitalized society can also provide higher short-term economic gains. By spending on green initiatives, we can create more jobs and induce greater economic growth in the short term, while also driving long-term prosperity. In May of 2020, I looked deeper into green investment with Oxford's Professor Katharine Hepburn, Nobel Prize winner Professor Joseph Stiglitz, eminent economist Professor Lord Nicholas Stern, and Dimitri Zingeles. In our paper, we surveyed over 230 leading economists representing central banks, finance ministries, and the epitome of academia to understand what types of fiscal responses to the pandemic had the highest potential to boost the economy. The study found that there are industries that both have high economic growth multipliers and also high positive climate impacts. Leading investment options included support of clean energy, green building efficiency retrofits, natural capital, clean research and development, and vitally, green worker retraining initiatives, which is an area I'd encourage questions on. Subsequently, we've been tracking how governments are spending and engaging within that on that, trying to understand the social, economic, and environmental components of their spending. And this is in partnership with the IMF, UNDP, UNEP, UNPAGE, and also the German Agency for International Cooperation. All of this is under the title of the Global Recovery Observatory, which you can find quite easily online. In the Global Recovery Observatory, you'll see Canada compared to the world. In total, we tally around 29 billion in COVID-related green spending in Canada, which is an encouraging number and does show some commendable foresight on the part of the government. However, this remains far below international commitments. For example, in 2020 alone, we saw almost 60 billion in France, over 40 billion in the UK, and of course, Canada's neighbors to the south look to be stepping up the game substantially, moving into the hundreds of billions, if not towards the trillion mark in green spending. Canada has also unfortunately announced some of the few dirty policies in the world. By dirty, I mean climate negative, which is a poor mark on the country's record. And given the context of the economic advantages of green spending I described, a little bit difficult to understand. So today, as an engineer turned acting economist, I've framed my evidence on economic grounds. Yet any responsible parliamentarian also understands that future prosperity is about more than economics. Future prosperity is built on innovation, on good jobs and growth, but also on a cohesive society with a stable climate and healthy ecosystems and landscapes. Here too, the overwhelming weight of academic evidence is positive for green investment. In short, targeted and well-designed policy can reduce inequalities while also pulling the handbrake on climate change. Now, my final 30 seconds, one final appeal. Canada needs to again look beyond its own borders as well, reclaiming a position of leadership in support of the world's most vulnerable nations. The gap between the most developed countries like Canada and the least developed countries who we engage with was enormous prior to COVID-19 and is only growing. In response to the virus, we've seen over $12,000 spent per person in developed nations. In the least developed countries, it's $10 per person. There's an opportunity to pair climate spending with that development assistance too, and I encourage Canada to take a leading role in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Ms. Christina Frank. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's great to see some familiar faces. For almost 100 years, CAFE has focused on helping our 743 organizations reach their full potential. We do this primarily by organizing a variety of professional development opportunities and advocating for our industry's interests. Our non for profit organizations offer their grounds as shelter when there are floods, or right now as vaccine or testing sites. We work with community organizations like the Lions Club or the fire department to host their fundraisers, and we host a whole slew of other programming such as summer camps, socials, dances, rodeos, concerts, representing more than 17,000 events across Canada, organized by an estimated 130,000 plus volunteers that see 35 million visitors and contribute an estimated economic impact of $2.9 billion annually. We're more than just a fair. We are community events and cultural hubs that are often older than Canada itself. When we look to how we can green our infrastructure and programming, I want to highlight that our industry has its own little ecosystem. The fair organizations are supported by thousands of small businesses, concessionaires, food trucks, artisans, and the list goes on. So when we put an eye to sustainable practices, we also need to pay attention to all of these aspects. One of the main challenges coming out of recovery is that we need to rebuild stakeholder confidence in mass gatherings when the time is right. One way to do that is by integrating green initiatives into our organization. This will have a domino effect, supporting our growth by giving us increased capacity to host expanded programming and draw new audiences in. Our first recommendation is to provide sustainable retrofitting and capital grants that target aging infrastructure. Our industry has almost 2,000 facilities across Canada that would cost an estimated $3.1 billion to replace. So, of course, repair and maintenance is crucial. This, however, presents unique challenges that end up being more costly. When designing a sustainable upgrade, we see additional costs to bring buildings up to code, to make them all seasoned with insulation and other measures, and to sometimes tear down in order to rebuild components. So any sustainable retrofitting grants need to account for the whole process in order for us to be able to take advantage of them. Operating as nonprofits means we don't have significant surpluses to put towards any major initiative, including capital projects, without launching massive fundraising campaigns. Our second recommendation is to support green innovation projects at events, particularly in rural areas. We have a chance to showcase new sustainable technologies and practices as well as educate Canadians, similar to what we are proud to do with agriculture. We are already starting to lead by example by diverting waste at events. The Canadian National Exhibition alone diverted 86% of the waste from landfills in 2019. The Armstrong IPE launched a composting initiative for their event in 2015, and it has seen exponential growth from diverting 1,250 pounds in its first year to more than 20,000 pounds in 2019. They also diverted 45,000 plastic bottles by providing water refill stations at their event. These programs take special signage and equipment, volunteers, and staff. To extend these and other innovative projects across Canada and our events, support from the federal government is critical. On the other hand, we need to think about the green initiatives of our service providers as well. Whether it be powering their equipment through alternative energy sources on the road and at their events, or diverting their own waste, they need equal support. Our third recommendation is to provide tax credits to implement green initiatives. As an example, a major Canadian entertainment company is already committing to a minimum of 50% recycled materials for all their assets in 2021, wardrobe, props, etc., as well as 25% recycled material for their merchandise. These are all incremental changes our service providers in our industry are taking or can take in order to support sustainability and could be easily rewarded with tax credits. Finally, we recommend providing industry-specific training on how to green your business or organization. Our organizations are resource strapped with dedicated volunteers that have done well in the past when they are given specified training, tools, and templates to lead new initiatives in their own organization. For example, CAFE offered a series of courses educating our industry on best practices to mitigate the spread of enteric pathogens. Similarly, we are currently developing a program to educate our community on best practices in animal care at public events. In both cases, participants walk away with a workbook and a foundation to develop their own plans and programs, using metrics and targets and with the support of the national body and federal government. Federal support of training and education will help our organizations understand the importance of sustainability, activate innovation, and develop best practices with a clear roadmap. Ultimately, we need to see language in these proposed programs that would be inclusive of our community organizations and their events, specifically referencing agricultural fairs, exhibitions, and event organizations. We are so pleased to see the Standing Committee looking to recovery as an opportunity to build a better Canada, and we look forward to being a part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will now turn to Mr. Dave Carey. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to appear before this committee today on this important study. My organization, the Canadian Canola Growers, represents 43,000 canola farmers from Ontario to British Columbia. National and international issues, policies, and programs that impact their farm success. CCJ is also the largest administrator of the federal government's advanced payments program, providing cash advances to help farmers better market their crops and finance their operations. Canola is a staple of Canadian agriculture, as well as Canadian science and innovation. Today, it is Canada's most widely planted crop and is the largest farm cash receipt of any agriculture commodity, earning Canadian farmers $10.2 billion in 2020. Annually, our sector contributes $29.9 billion to the Canadian economy and provides for 207,000 jobs. Exports drive canola's success. More than 90% of the canola grown in Canada is exported as seed, oil, or meal. COVID-19 has demonstrated the critical role that agriculture and agri-food plays as an essential industry. Agriculture and canola production in particular have helped spur our economy during the recent pandemic economic downturn. However, there are areas for improvement domestically and on the export front to help further canola's ability to sustainably grow Canadian prosperity. Around regulatory modernization and innovation, the Canada Grain Act, the government must finalize a review of the Canadian Grain Commission and modernize the Canada Grain Act to ensure Canada's grain quality system aligns with the modern grain trading environment. Updates to the Act are essential to reflect the significant changes to both farming and grain marketing over the last 40 years. Gene editing. Health Canada recently launched consultations on new regulatory guidance around plant breeding innovation, like gene editing. These are a positive step for canola farmers. Our country has long been a leader in plant breeding innovation, but our current regulations around plant breeding find us lagging behind countries like Japan, Australia, Latin America, and the United States. The future competitiveness and sustainability of Canadian farms relies on a regulatory system that supports new plant breeding and techniques like gene editing. The Pest Management Regulatory Agency. PMRA requires consistent, reliable, robust, impartial data to fulfill its mandate as a science-based regulatory body. We strongly support the creation of a pan-Canadian water monitoring program housed within the PMRA. Without accurate data to make science-based decisions, Canada could be perceived as a jurisdiction with increasingly high levels of regulatory uncertainty, thereby disincentivizing registrants from commercializing chemistries in Canada that ultimately help with our sustainability efforts. Around domestic diversification and biofuels, to hedge against international market volatility, increasing the amount of canola used in biofuel will help create stable domestic market for canola. Utilization of canola-based biofuels through the Clean Fuel Regulations, or CFR, could create a new domestic market equal to or greater than the size of our Japanese export market, around 1.3 million tons of canola. And it could also help Canada significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 3.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent a year, approximately 1 million cars. To realize the potential economic environmental benefits of canola-based biofuel and the final CFR, which will reach Canada Gazette 2 this fall, we must ensure that it grants full aggregate compliance for Canadian and U.S. farmers, and that canola's low carbon advantage is reflected in the life cycle analysis model. Lastly, around international trade, farmers are well positioned to provide safe, reliable canola supplies both domestically and to the world, but require rules-based, predictable framework to grow our exports. Promoting this framework will be even more important to counter protectionist policies post-COVID-19 as countries turn inwards. Trade is key to the world's economic recovery, and modernization of the World Trade Organization is essential to ensure borders and supply chains remain open. CCJ, along with the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, are advocating for the creation of a Chief of Trade Implementation position at Global Affairs Canada to strengthen Canada's capacity to monitor and mobilize resources to fully implement and capitalize on existing free trade agreements. We're also requesting the creation of an Asian Diversification Office that has capacity and mandate to proactively prevent and resolve market access challenges in Asia. 60% of global population resides in Asia, and increasing disposable income and changing food requirements makes canola an attractive option for both seed, oil, and meal. Lastly, for the canola sector to achieve its full potential, reopening the China market must remain a priority. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with this committee today and look forward to questions on canola sustainability targets.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carey. We will now turn to Daniel Breton. Monsieur Breton, vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Perfect. Hello. We'd like to thank the members of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology for their study on the economic recovery after COVID-19. My name is Daniel Breton, and I'm President and CEO of the Electric Mobility Canada. Founded in 2006, Electric Mobility Canada is one of the first organizations in the world dedicated to electric mobility. EMC's members include electricity providers, mining companies, vehicle manufacturers, charging infrastructure providers, technology companies, research centers, cities, universities, fleet managers, unions, environmental NGOs, etc. Electric Mobility Canada is the national organization with the most experience and expertise to help advance transportation, electrification, thinking, regulation, and projects in the country.
2021 ECCC report, Canada's GHG emissions have decreased by only 1% in the 14 years between 2005 and 2019. Now that Canada's new target is to lower our GHG emissions by between 40 and 45% by 2030 compared to our 2005 emissions, this means that we will have to lower our greenhouse gas emissions by at least 39% in 9 years, which is both ambitious and feasible. According to a recently released report from Health Canada, the total economic cost of all health impacts from air pollution for the year is $120 billion. This is the equivalent to about 6% of Canada's real gross domestic product in 2016. It represents 15,300 premature deaths, 8 times the death toll of car accidents in the country. In addition to being a major emitter of GHGs, transportation is also a significant source of air pollution in Canada, according for 31% of its black carbon emissions, 33% of its carbon monoxide emissions, and 41% of its nitrogen oxide emissions. According to Electric Vehicle Outlook 2020 from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, EV growth from passenger cars to light trucks to heavy-duty trucks will be exponential in the years to come. Passenger EV sales jumped from 450,000 in 2015 to 2.1 million in 2019. They are expected to reach 8.5 million in 2025 and 26 million by 2030. Worldwide EV sales should grow from 2.7% in 2020 to 10% in 2025, 28% in 2030, and 58% or more in 2040. According to a newly released report by TD Economics, it is estimated that by 2050, between 312,000 and 450,000 of Canada's current 600,000 direct and indirect jobs in oil and gas could become casualties of falling demand for fossil fuel as more countries and companies commit to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. According to another report from Clean Energy Canada, there will be approximately 560,000 clean jobs by 2030. Almost 50% of these jobs will be in clean transportation. According to a 2020 analysis by Electric Mobility Canada, a Canadian electric mobility strategy inspired by those of BC, Quebec, or California could generate up to $200 billion in revenue between 2021 and 2030. Therefore, accelerating the transition to zero-emission vehicles from light to heavy duty will help save thousands of lives and billions of dollars for Canadian taxpayers every year, while creating quality Canadian jobs from BC to Atlantic Canada. As we come out of the COVID-19 crisis, will Canada take advantage of the fight against climate change and air pollution to create jobs through a recovery plan in a high-tech sector such as electric mobility? Or will Canadians have to import all of their electric vehicles, batteries, and technologies from elsewhere, and therefore miss the boat on high-quality, high-paying long-term jobs? At EMC, we are convinced that with all its expertise, plus its natural and human resources, Canada is in a perfect position to become a world leader in electric mobility in partnership with our US ally. But there is no time to waste, since other regions like Europe and Asia are really accelerating their support towards the EV industrial revolution.
In closing, Electric Mobility Canada, in collaboration with other Canadian industry stakeholders, will formally announce by June the launch of a Canadian ZEV Supply Chain Alliance to help accelerate Canada's industrial transition to electrification of transportation. In addition, we will soon be releasing a report on the state of the art in transportation electrification in Canada. Time permitting, over the next 2 hours, Electric Mobility Canada will make 7 recommendations to accelerate economic recovery through electric mobility. Thank you.
We'll now go to Ms. Lloyd. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear today. My name is Priyanka Lloyd, and I am the Executive Director of Green Economy Canada. I'm pleased to join you from Waterloo, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I'm here to share our perspective on how the Government of Canada can help businesses across the country to recover in a stronger and more resilient way post-pandemic. In particular, the focus of my remarks will be on the importance of investments to support small businesses to thrive and become more competitive in a global shift to a low-carbon future. Green Economy Canada is a national nonprofit that supports a network of community-based green economy hubs across the country. These hubs are working with 300 businesses of all sectors and sizes to voluntarily take action on climate change and build sustainability into their operations. Through our network's decade of experience, we have seen firsthand how businesses can reduce their environmental impacts while increasing their profitability. Small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, make up more than 99% of businesses in Canada. They employ 9 in 10 private sector workers and contribute more than half of our GDP. These are the businesses in your communities, the coffee shops, restaurants, retail stores, and countless other seen and unseen businesses that form the backbone of our economy. Yet despite the vital role that small businesses play in job creation and innovation, they have been chronically overlooked in how they can help Canada achieve its climate action goals and reap the benefits of a greener economy. As we look to recover from the impacts of COVID-19, now more than ever, small businesses need every advantage possible to get back on solid ground. This, this includes the substantial benefits that they can get from greening their operations. Take these examples. Your credit union is a small financial services cooperative in Ottawa. By installing a building automation system, they were able to shave 30% off their annual electricity bill. Walker Emulsions is a wax and asphalt emulsions company in Burlington. They're able to save $43,000 per year by installing a water softener to reduce the buildup in their process heat exchangers. Veriform is a small steel and metal fabricator in Cambridge, Ontario. They have been investing in energy efficiency upgrades for over a decade and have saved over $2 million while doubling their facility size and expanding their workforce by 30%. These investments have also allowed Veriform to weather shocks like US steel and aluminum tariffs. Permanently lowering operating costs helps businesses withstand economic downturns and leaves room to reinvest in jobs and growth, which keeps more dollars circulating in local communities. Multiply this impact across hundreds of thousands of small businesses and communities in Canada, and the result is not just recovery, but growth. Clean, green growth. Moreover, as countries around the world are making bold commitments to move towards a net zero future, the ability of Canadian companies to produce and export our goods and services in a low carbon way will be critical for us to remain competitive on the global stage. Existing discussions and the recent federal budget have focused on loans, grants, and digitization supports to help SMEs to recover post-pandemic. But the new normal demands that businesses are also reducing their carbon emissions to remain competitive and resilient. Green recovery investments for businesses in the federal budget were targeted at heavy industry and clean tech manufacturing. While these are important and needed, they do little for the vast majority of businesses in Canada. Without meaningful investments to support SMEs to seize the low carbon advantage, this critical segment of our economy risks getting left behind and will find it difficult to adapt to key regulations like $170 per ton carbon price by 2030. Moreover, small businesses will feel mounting pressure from larger organizations who are now aligning with net zero emissions targets to demonstrate how they are reducing their emissions as part of an increased focus on greening supply chains. Based on the feedback from our network and our experience with previous climate action programs, we urge the Government of Canada to invest seriously in helping small businesses to reduce their emissions. We hear time and time again that many small businesses are concerned about climate change and want to do their fair share, but they need more direct support to overcome the barriers they face in doing so. Small businesses need targeted financial need deeper direct support to help them make lasting changes to their operation that are good for the planet and good for their bottom line. This includes support for small businesses to set goals and develop concrete plans aligned with achieving Canada's 2030 and 2050 climate targets, the way that larger organizations are doing. In closing, we applaud the federal government for its commitment to climate action and making significant investments that can drive a green recovery. However, to ensure that our economy thrives in the transition to a net zero future, we cannot forget to invest in small businesses to do their part. The support we provide to small businesses now will determine not just Canada's ability to meet our international commitments, but if we are successful in setting businesses on a path to a stronger and more resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we will turn it over to the Toronto Community Benefits Network. Ms. Powell, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, honorable members of Parliament and members of the Industry, Science and Technology Standing Committee. My name is Rosemary Powell, and I am joined by my colleague, Kumsa Bakker, representing the TCBN. The Toronto Community Benefits Network is a 120-member and growing coalition of community organizations, grassroots groups and social enterprises, unions, construction trades training centers, and workforce development agencies. Our mandate as a nonprofit organization is to partner with the government and with the construction industry to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the economy and workforce of this industry that has historically excluded Black, Indigenous, and racialized Canadians. We propose community benefits agreements as a proven and effective means to tackle this historic and systemic economic and employment equity issue, an issue that will only be further compounded as we seek a green recovery if not addressed in an intentional way. When done right, it is a solution that creates a win-win solution for all, including for the industry as it struggles to find skilled workers to meet the growing demand and deal with impending mass-scale retirements. Buildforce Canada projects that the Canadian construction industry demand will intensify over the long term, requiring more than 300,000 workers over a decade. In the middle of a pandemic, the best place to find skilled workers is in our local communities from demographics that have low participation rates in the industry. Over the next decades, government have allocated hundreds of billions of dollars to be spent on public infrastructure to build and maintain housing, roads, transit, water supply, electricity, and telecommunications in urban and rural communities. It is imperative that government leaders ensure these large public infrastructure projects include CBAs that can ensure equitable workforce and business opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and racialized peoples, including women, persons with disabilities, veterans, vulnerable youth, and newcomers. These approaches to infrastructure investment contribute to the federal government's environmental, economic, and social policy objectives while delivering world-class infrastructure projects. CBAs as part of large-scale public infrastructure projects, it's not new. Here in Toronto, the TCBN is currently implementing community benefits on 5 major infrastructure projects, including the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, the Finch West LRT, West Park Healthcare Center, and Casino Woodbine expansion projects. Federally, community benefits have been included in projects like the Gordie Howe Bridge in Windsor, which ensures economic, social, and environmental benefits to support and strengthen the local economy. Through the various community benefits programs and projects in Toronto, TCBN has worked with our network partners to support hundreds of peoples from underrepresented groups into well-paying careers in the construction industry and on these projects. That includes both skilled trades and professional administrative and technical positions. Now, although CBAs have been proven to help strengthen diversity in the industry, we remind you that it was just this past summer that nooses were found on 5 separate construction sites with Black workers in Toronto. While we support policies like the Federal Community Employment Benefits Program, which can be a valuable tool to create local workforce and business opportunities for underrepresented groups, we need the government to ensure that these policies are adopted, implemented, tracked, monitored, and publicly reported. We also need to ensure that all contractors have policies that ensure employment equity and that its workforce are free from racism, discrimination, harassment, and or hate. Last spring, at the height of the pandemic, we were extremely disappointed to see the dismissal by certain construction and engineering firms like the Canadian Construction Association and Progressive Contractors Association of community benefits agreements and the livelihoods they support. This came at a time when participants of our Quick Start in Construction pre-apprenticeship training program were graduating and looking for entry into well-paying careers in the unionized construction industry. In response, TCBN invited allies from our community, labor, and corporate partners to endorse a joint letter to the federal government, and it was extremely impactful, and we got tons of support from across Canada. This is something that our communities want to see, and we implore the government to take leadership in this very important issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So with that, we will start our rounds of questions. Our first 6-minute round will go to Député Généreux.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses who are in attendance today. What you've said is very interesting. And a little summary, just on a personal point, I'm a former mayor of La Bocotière, a community on the lower South Shore. In 2005, some 16 years ago, I got into Quebec politics. Quebec had as a goal to ensure that by 15 years later, the province have green boxes installed everywhere to do away with, what were the heaviest garbage bags we had in Quebec compared to the rest of the world. Of course, the policy has not managed to be implemented entirely, and deadlines have been extended. So that's example of a policy that was very avant-garde back then, hasn't entirely been implemented. Mr. Breton, Mr. Généreux, we apologize. The bells in the chamber are ringing.
To continue, I need unanimous consent from the committee to allow us to continue to maybe at least try to get in the first round before we have to suspend to a vote. Do I have unanimous consent of the committee to continue? Okay, I'm looking. I'm not.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Parfait. So please go ahead. Vas-y, Mr. Généreux.
Mr. Généreux, you can proceed. Yes, so these policies unfortunately could not be implemented as wanted at the beginning. It's all very well to put in place policies to improve the environment and save the planet. But in Quebec, these policies unfortunately could not be all implemented because of their costs. Municipalities do not necessarily want to implement policies because of cost. La Pocatière was one of the first municipalities to do so. Under my leadership, Mr. Breton, I want to address my question to you. So it's not related to electrification of transport, but it's the fact is when you decide on putting in place a policy, and I was looking at the figures, 2005 to 2020, we only lowered by 1%. The objective was 30 to lower greenhouse gases. So there's pollution also related to waste, not just transportation. What do you think of the fact that when you put policies in place, you can't implement them because of associated costs? That's an excellent question. You have to examine short-term costs. I'll give you an example. In municipalities, sometimes municipality will not have the means to implement a policy, a provincial or federal policy. With electrification of transportation, it's a win-win situation. The more electric vehicles enter in the market and are competitive, the total cost of ownership are such that electric vehicles become competitive. It's an investment. I have a book out on that. I talk about the investment for a citizen or for a municipality, including a government. When you lower your energy costs, you lower your healthcare costs, your maintenance costs. I've been studying many municipalities, small and large, and they see that this ownership is well worthwhile. So with the more that you have electric cars, the cheaper they get, be they light, buses, or heavy vehicles. You have to examine this with a total cost lens, but with a green recovery, which is the purposes of the report we'd like to table. So let's imagine that the entire fleet in Canada was electric tomorrow morning. My mom always told me, yes, you can transform everything. We all live on the same planet. We can all benefit. So you have, the gas in the west, the oil out west. And I know we're going to be using oil for many more years, even if we'll reduce it, the consumption of it. But electrification of transport has associated costs, just manufacturing costs. The production of the battery, the recycling of the batteries. What about all those costs? Do you deem those as associated costs? Are they assessed? We want to generate jobs in Canada. We want to produce those products in Canada. Maybe the batteries will have a battery plant, but batteries are made with raw materials that have associated costs, environmentally speaking. So tomorrow morning, if the whole fleet in Canada was electrified, there'd be an environmental cost to that too. Have you assessed it? Yes. often, and we do it regularly in our association. An electric car has an environmental cost, you're right, but the total environment cost is much less. And in the worst case scenario, we're talking about a gain of 20% in reduction of greenhouse gases. And in Alberta, with 92% of energy coming from coal and gas, that'll improve because we'll be closing down coal plants in Alberta. But in the best case scenario, you'll go to 60, 70, 80% environmental gains. You talked about the raw materials and rare minerals for batteries. There's a bit of a myth. There's 0% rare minerals in batteries, but there are in gas-consuming vehicles, and that's why we have a shortage. So the electric car is not the solution. It is one of the solutions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Go to MP Erskine Smith. You have 6 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. I want to start, Mr. O'Callaghan. With respect to the climate change debate in Canada, we often hear from the opposition that climate action is going to mean lost jobs, and that there is this idea that the economy and environment get pitted as against one another. Some may well understand and appreciate that in the long term there may well be economic gains, but you've come before us and you said not only will we see strong long-term economic multipliers, but in fact, even in the short term, green climate-focused spending will have stronger short-term economic multipliers. Can you explain that to me in some greater detail?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question. It's a great one. I think that the idea that environmental or progressive environmental investment is bad for the economy is honestly at this point a misnomer. That was true 20 years ago when the cost of many of these interventions were prohibitive. But now, because of how much cheaper technologies have become, they make a lot more sense. It's interesting that you bring up the short versus long-term debate here. In our modeling, the job impacts of many of these clean investments are really towards the short term. If you think about building a new renewable energy plant, the whole idea is not to have a significant employee base in the long term because the plants run themselves. But there is significant employment in the short term, and according to the modeling that we've done with Vivid Economics, or a big consultancy based out of London, the job creation prospects of those clean investments in almost every case are higher than a dirty alternative. So that's the job side. And then you've also asked about the economic multiplier side. We've been modeling GVA, gross value added. And again, in the short term, the gross value added from a particular investment is equivalent to, and in many cases greater than, investments in dirty alternatives. So the dirty alternative in clean energy is coal or gas. In sustainable transport is just a new road. So a dirty alternative, for example. The long-term growth that we talk about is enabled by the short-term investments. So take, for example, clean energy. The long-term growth there is as a result of much cheaper long-term access to electricity, which enables your electric vehicles, which enables a transition to more efficient agriculture. All of those different things are enabled by that investment in the long term there. So that's the short versus long-term dynamic we talk about.
You, in your paper from May, you delineate 5 types of policies: clean physical infrastructure, building efficiency, investments in education and training, natural capital investment, and clean R&D spending. You, in your opening remarks, said you'd be open to some questions as it relates to worker training in particular. When you look at those 5 categories and you look at global recovery packages and you look at the Canadian recovery package, what's missing?
Sure. I would state that the retraining piece is the biggest missing component in most developed economies. And if any participant is interested in seeing the breakdown of current spending, you can either go and look at the Global Recovery Observatory, or a paper titled Are We Building Back Better?, which I wrote with the United Nations Environment Program. And in there, you note that there's, in developed economies, been spending on a wide range of green initiatives with this big hole in worker retraining. In the context of COVID, where we've seen human capital being decreased at literally every turn, so talk about school closures, talk about furlough programs, and talk about just unemployment. Human capital has dropped significantly. Industries are in transition, and yet most governments aren't investing in some type of employee retraining or education initiatives to develop a workforce that is ready for those new jobs that you're pouring billions of dollars into otherwise. So that signal there in my remarks was specifically to the lack of investment in green retraining initiatives.
Which is odd, not only to your comments as it relates to growth, economic growth and job creation. It's also odd, I have to say, politically here in Canada. One of the biggest challenges we see with taking serious action on climate change is this real concern that is hyper localized in particular regions of this country, that if we transition away from certain sectors, we are going to lose jobs. And the better political answer in some respects would be to invest massively in supporting workers, not particular kinds of work, supporting that job retraining, supporting workers in particular geographies, not in particular sectors. So it is a missing piece in a number of different respects. As I have a few minutes left, I want to focus on a couple minutes left, maybe, Sherry. We'll see. 30 seconds left. Okay. Well, then in that case, could you highlight a couple of policies that we have? You mentioned dirty policies. Can you highlight a couple of policies here in Canada that maybe we shouldn't have that we do as it relates to recovery?
Sure. And I might first just go back to the retraining piece and say that it's not just green retraining that we've missed, it's retraining everywhere. And it is a very difficult thing to do at scale, which is why I think many governments have stayed away from it. One potentially useful example is from the neighbors down south, who I think are investing $100 billion in theory in their new, as a part of the job plan, which the administration has announced. So that's something to stay aware of. Apologies, Sherry.
Thank you so much. We'll now go to Député Lemire. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For Mr. Breton, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's an honor for me to welcome you at this committee. Mr. Breton, I'm sure you know that I have a 100% electric car. I want to contribute to the conversion of our fleet so that I'm also interested in the electrification programs. 80,000 kilometers. Apparently, it does good things for the environment, but what's its life cycle or life expectancy? You talk about for how long will we be able to recover the environment? It's actually not 80,000. It's around 30,000, given the enhancements in the manufacturing of electric vehicles. But about the life cycle or expenses are going to depend on the model. You could have 250,000, 500,000 kilometers with an electric vehicle, when with some gas-fueled vehicles, you can also do something similar. You talk about 7 recommendations to benefit the green recovery. So can you discuss some of those? Yes, we have 7 recommendations. First, that we have a Canadian strategy on the electrification of transport. I myself was very involved with that area. So rather than just piecemeal projects, we would like a strategy in terms of the supply chain. We'd like to be able to manufacture as much as possible the components used in vehicles in Canada. A second part would be regulation. You know, if you want to attain an objective, you need regulations to do so. So in the Canadian climate plan, They want to work on light-duty vehicle regulations and performance standards. We need to look towards California that is wanting to stop the sale of gas-fueled vehicles. And then for retraining, green retraining, I agree with Mr. O'Callaghan and MP Erskine Smith. We really have a lack of education in that regard. We're going to lose jobs in one sector, but we're already lacking in qualified workers in the green energy jobs. I was pleasantly surprised to see in the federal budget last week there's a lot of money earmarked for training. We should go for it from BC over to the Maritimes. A centralized resource hub and coordination. That's what we're going to need. Everybody needs to be able to communicate with each other. And for number 5, we need infrastructure, recharging vehicle infrastructure. Most of the recharging is done at home, but we need the infrastructure, be it electrical or hydrogen. We have to continue to support electric vehicles, be they small or large. There'll be a variety in pricing. And similar as we've seen in other sectors, the oil sector, the information technology sectors, we need investment. So we need also green procurement to make sure that the fleets and the infrastructure of Canadian government and crown societies are using these vehicles. Don't hear you. Sorry. Sorry, I was muted. You just mentioned hydrogen. There are some types of hydrogen that you can associate with green or more green. Hydrogen can be made from renewable resources or from gas or oil. So the environment impact is not going to be the same. With transportation, a hydrogen vehicle is more like a heavy vehicle, boats, planes, but the short term, even heavier, with even if they have a battery, they'll have lesser impacts on the environment. So electrification of transport, you talked about supply chain and the electrification of industry. So can you talk about the strategy? 96% of electric vehicle batteries are made in Asia. And that means that we don't have a sustainable context economically or geopolitically. We don't want to find ourselves in the same situation we had with oil and Middle East and conflicts. We were dependent on a particular region for our oil supplies. So if we want to develop an industry environmentally and politically positive for Canada, Quebec, and even the United States, what we need is an agreement to develop a supply chain for electric vehicles across Canada and the USA. And the Biden-Trudeau agreement goes in that direction. Thank you.
Goes to MP Massey. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our guests for being here. My first questions will be to the Toronto Community Benefit Network. With regards to the federal budget that was just announced and is going through itself through the House of Commons right now, can you highlight a couple opportunities there? I mean, we can do a lot of symbolic gestures about equality, but they're really meaningless if we don't actually get the programs out there and have the results and measuring the results by dealing with the inequities. Your work is crucial in getting some of those real jobs created. For my project, the Gordie Howe International Bridge, we got some basic community benefits of pittance in the overall project, but it was the first big step forward. But it is a recognition that a federal project can actually have community benefits. Can you highlight maybe a couple opportunities of the federal budget that might be advantageous to move this along?
I'll allow my colleague Kumsa Bakker to speak, but just in general, absolutely, the federal budget, we felt that it was, well, we received it very well in terms of the investment that government planned to make, and there was a lot of um, focus on Black and racialized communities for support and financial investment for community organizations that serve the Black community, which was great. But when it came to infrastructure, it was very silent on the supports for specifically for Black and Indigenous peoples. And is that when the focus is not there, the organizations who are applying for funding will not, specifically identify this demographic as a community that ought to be served. So it will be really important in your community employment benefits that the terminology around Black and Indigenous and racialized people be specifically addressed there. There are also provisions for social procurement that we also need to consider to ensure that when the funds is going to be distributed to the provinces and then from the provinces to the provincial governments, that we have community benefits framework in place that will ensure employment equity provisions in it. Kumsa?
Yeah, and I would just add, I think one of the other additional, opportunities that we see is federal land. And one of the things that we've been working closely here in Toronto is the Downsview Park, which is currently undergoing a large sort of master planning for redevelopment once Bombardier leaves in 2023. And that's a federally sort of regulated project where we see an opportunity for, mixed communities to be developed, but also being done in a way where it's equitable. And so we want to see community benefit agreements be applied, similarly to projects where there may be federal scope related to land development. Similarly, we're supporting a group in Ottawa as part of the Le Breton Flats, which is also another sort of large-scale project under the National Capital Commission. That's going to be lots of investments, into that project, and making sure that as we build back better, making sure that we have strong commitments and targets for community benefit agreements, but also making sure that those communities, especially those underrepresented groups who've negatively been impacted by the pandemic, whether it's health wise, whether it's economically, that those groups are getting prioritized in those new training opportunities, those investments that are going into supporting skills development. And so we're looking forward to that sort of commitment to make sure that when we reflect back on sort of all of this recovery work, that we see strong commitments and outcomes for equity.
So, and just tying them into the project, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't, mention she passed away, Shelley Harding Smith, one of my closest friends and mentor. She was a role model to many women as being a master Black electrician in Canada, working for Ford, and she was a fixture in Sandwichtown where everybody knew her in this small area. So you actually get individuals that have a profound echo effect, even past when they move on. Is that part of the so is to kind of make sure that those things are guaranteed as part of the contract so we can get those measurable results later on?
Absolutely. That is the idea, to ensure that in the procurement itself, when the government sends out the request for proposal, that there is specific language that the industry understands, a blueprint of sorts that lets them know that this is a requirement when they are submitting their proposals, that they must include provisions that will ensure employment equity. We want to see this also included in the collective agreements between the unions and the general contractors as well. Another issue that needs to happen is just also to look at the subcontractor community. So yes, there's the large billion-dollar projects, but these billion-dollar projects gets broken down through layers of subcontracting. How do we ensure that the supply chain And the subcontractors who are providing or delivering on behalf of these general contractors also have those same requirements and have that same language inside of their contracts.
Excellent. I'm going to move on to Mr. Breton to a couple of quick questions.
My apologies, MP Massey, you're out of time.
Sorry, Madam Chair, it went really quick.
So that is the end of the first round, and there is less than 5 minutes remaining before the question is put in the House. So what I will do is I'm going to suspend to allow members to be able to hear the question, to vote, because members have 10 minutes to vote and technically could change their vote during that 10-minute time. I don't want to take away that option for MPs. So once you've voted, if you want to come back to the meeting, but I don't want to start the meeting until MPs have been able to vote and to make sure that their vote is counted. So I will suspend for now. We will go to the vote, and I will call the meeting back to order once we've had a chance for everyone to vote. Thank you. Thank you again for your patience. We will now start round 2. With that, we will turn it over to MP Barlow. Welcome to INDU. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate the welcome. Look forward to the discussion. Mr. Carey, good to see you again. Appreciate your insights, but I also want to first congratulate you on co-chairing the newly formed Agriculture Carbon Alliance. I think that is an excellent initiative and certainly well-timed, as I think it's an opportunity for us to highlight the incredible work that agriculture has done in terms of sustainability and protecting our environment over the last few decades. So I'm hopeful we'll see some great work that comes out of that alliance. But in your presentation, Mr. Carey, you were talking about the importance of competitiveness, and I couldn't agree with you more that as we try to dig ourselves out of a very deep financial hole as a result of COVID, I see agriculture as one of those critical industries that will provide some of those economic development opportunities. How important is it when it comes to that competitive factor for agriculture post-COVID, when you see, some of the government's policies that have maybe hurt that competitiveness, including some reciprocal issues with canola to China, for example, now $170 carbon tax coming in the next few years. What impact do some of these policies have on the canola industry, and what are some of those things that you see need to be addressed to ensure that competitiveness?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, canola and agriculture have a really positive story to tell when it comes to environmental policy and the intersection of agriculture and environmental policy. I think it's really important that going forward that there's an understanding of how agriculture works when environmental policy is being crafted so that it can be implemented on farm. China closure of the 2 largest grain handlers has certainly been a huge hit on the industry. We have had really strong commodity prices in 2020, which has helped buoy that. But domestic demand for canola through biofuels has certainly helped with that. But when it comes to competitiveness, I think it's important to note around carbon pricing. It's typically designed to disincentivize certain behaviors. And when it comes to agriculture, primary agriculture in Western Canada, there's been a lot of talk about electrification, but there simply is not the infrastructure in Western Canada to run a grain dryer. For example, you can't reach the BTUs in Alberta using electricity. You have to use propane or natural gas. If farmers could use more electricity, they would, because it's cheaper than propane or natural gas. So I think it's just understanding the realities on farm, and that we've relied on farmers throughout the pandemic, both from a food security perspective and an export perspective. Going forward, to address the second part of your question, canola has specific targets, but in agriculture, we don't want to break more land. We don't want to put more land into production. So what we're trying to do is intensification and get more production per acre, higher yield, less disease, less damage from weather. And the way we're going to do that is through new plant breeding innovations like gene editing. And the concerns that we have now is that we're going to achieve those new yields through using technology like gene editing. But Canada's regulatory environment is one that's not incentivizing small, medium-sized, or even global players to invest in plant breeding here. There's been 2 examples of Canadian innovations developed in Canada, tested, trialed in Canada, commercialized in the United States because there's a clear path to market.
Yeah, a great point, and I couldn't agree with you more on some of those new technologies and innovations, which are so important for agriculture. And one of those would be those pest management tools that you talked about. And we've seen some issues with the PMRA, for example, in how they're assessing some of those very important pest management tools that we ensure protecting the soil and being able to grow more on less. How important is it for PMRA to ensure that they're using up-to-date data, strong, rigorous investigation, but also using economic impact as one of the criteria in their analysis of these important tools like neonicotinoids, for example?
Yeah, thank you. I think, PMRA is a world-class institution. Besides Canada, the US, and Australia, there's very few pest management agencies that really uphold the high level of science using risk as opposed to hazard. The concern that we have is that in the absence of data, as PMRA doesn't currently have a requirement in the Pest Control Products Act to actually do monitoring, that if water monitoring, for example, for us is that in the absence of data, they make very conservative assumptions that aren't based on real world conditions. And if that continues to happen, farmers don't have access to tools that actually, they don't have to plow their land. They can allow cover crops and they can be more sustainable. And it also means that we will not get the next generation of chemistries registered in Canada because we're taking away technologies based on science that isn't complete. So we need to make sure PMRA has the data to do their work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carey. I appreciate your time. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, MP Barlow. We'll now go to MP Jasic for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Certainly your testimony has been extremely interesting today, covering a wide range of subjects. My first question is for Ms. Lloyd. I am aware of some of the good work that Green Economy Canada has been doing, specifically in my riding of Markham-Stouffville, and you wanted to emphasize your work with small and medium-sized business. It sounds from your description that you assist them in terms of navigation of opportunities, in terms of possible government assistance. Could you describe that a little bit more? And perhaps, if you can, allude to where some of Budget 2021 might come in and potentially help some of these small and medium-sized businesses.
Thank you for the question. Yes, so through our local green economy hubs, like the Climate Wise Business Network in York Region, it's a membership-based program where any business can sign up. 85% of the businesses in our network are small and medium-sized enterprises. And so in signing up, what they get is support to measure their carbon footprint because you can't manage what you don't measure. Develop reduction plans aligned with where their biggest sources of emissions come from, and set long-term GHG reduction targets so that they can make progress towards emissions reductions over the long term and align their business strategies. Part of that is, what we know, for small and medium-sized businesses in particular, it's true for all businesses, but small businesses in particular, is that they often lack the time, knowledge, and resources to do this kind of work on their own. And we're doing one project right now specifically focused on what it will take to get SME manufacturers to a net zero emissions future. One of the interesting preliminary findings coming out of that is, yes, financial pieces are important, but really what's coming up just as important is the knowledge of what to do. They keep sort of saying, like, we're ready, we're interested, just tell us what kind of the next step is to be doing this, because they don't have the in-house expertise. So the hubs kind of at the local level bridge that gap and help those businesses understand the pathway for what they need to do in a way that makes good business sense and connects those businesses to one another so they can learn and share best practices and then amplify that. So to be able to share the success stories so that others businesses can see that there is a financial, social, and environmental benefit to doing this work. In terms of what was there in budget 2021, so lots of good social supports, I think, for small businesses. So in terms of wage subsidies, in terms of support for digitization, all of that there. But truthfully, we did see a gap there in budget 2021, a gap that has been there not just this time, but historically, in really looking at how to help small businesses incorporate some of these green practices into their operations. So things like retrofit funding, specifically geared towards small businesses, would have been extremely helpful. Typically, the way these programs have been designed in the past have favored larger organizations. The project thresholds and the application processes have been really difficult for small businesses to access. And we know that things like energy efficiency are quick wins for businesses because they also often come with financial savings. So, I think as hopefully there are more investments to come, and this is something that can be looked at more seriously, but, investments in heavy industry and clean tech are really important. It's a critical part of us getting to where we need to be. But it feels like, in general, the small business perspective and the value that's placed on small businesses doing their part has not yet been recognized or invested in.
So potentially one solution would be to lower thresholds for applications for some of these financial opportunities. Are there other sort of specific things that you could recommend?
Absolutely. So in terms of, so a couple of categories. So in terms of retrofit projects, I think in terms of program design, making smaller projects eligible and providing more upfront capital is going to help those businesses to actually take on those projects and access those things. Streamline the application process would also be really useful. But outside of those financial incentives for capital projects, support to help them build their internal capacity is really important. So things like the NRCan Energy Manager program, being able to bring an energy manager into an organization is really useful. We talk about job skills training, but there's a whole workforce of businesses that haven't been designed with green in mind. How we start to train people internally, everyday people, to understand what a transition to a green economy means will be really important. And then to be able to scale up networks like ours that at the local level provide that support and connection so that businesses can undertake this work is going to be really important too.
Thank you very much. La prochaine question, c'est pour...
Next question for MP Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to continue with Danielle Breton. In your statement, you mentioned that you need a supply chain dedicated to electric vehicles. What would be all of the components to develop that supply chain? One, you'd have to ensure that you examine all of the ecosystem from the mining through the R&D, university programs, infrastructure, recycling, and that is a very important component we did not talk about. But when you talk about gas-fueled vehicles or diesel, the gas is not recyclable, whereas electric batteries have components in that can be recycled up to 95%. And we even have enterprises in Quebec who have developed very promising technology for that. And there are agreements being signed. So the complete supply chain should be such that you're not just taking raw materials and sending them abroad and they come back to us as finished products. Now, we want a third transformation to get the value added. And this is an unfortunate reflex we have in Quebec and Canada. I've seen that kind of practice as a former politician. 1 cent a ton, as we used to say. The thing is, we can do a lot better. And the historic opportunity we have for us to create quality jobs in Quebec and Canada is not an opportunity that's going to come around a second time. There's acceleration everywhere, China, Europe, United States. And if Canada doesn't come up with a plan for the industrial development of the electrification of transport, we'll end up with the crumbs. So I'm a MP in a mining region, and I know the importance of that. We had Freeland table the budget last week, adopted yesterday. So electric transport has been recognized as a good investment opportunity. What are the other steps? Well, what was announced in the Freeland budget is very general. I think there's a lack of detail, much as there are interesting aspects. So we'll have to see the details in the coming weeks and months. Thank you, and I count on you being vigilant in that regard. Thank you.
To MP Massé, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Madam Chair, and Mr. Breton, I can remember the days back in 2003, I showed the film Who Killed the Electric Car. It was based upon the EV that General Motors had done, and now have come full circle to embracing it quite differently. One of the interesting side effects we have now is something you've noted that I don't think gets a lot of recognition. I also worked on a bill called the Right to Repair, which was the automotive aftermarket, getting the information, technology, equipment, and servicing for the other people that are fixing vehicles other than dealerships. In the United States, that was provided because of the Environmental Protection Agency and other work. But now Tesla refuses to sign the voluntary agreement. So long story short, my bill passed second reading in the House of Commons, but eventually became a voluntary agreement. But one of the things that hasn't happened is Tesla hasn't signed on to that. Just curious as to what we should do about that, whether perhaps we need to maybe look at a non-voluntary agreement at some point, because if we're going to have more electric vehicle suppliers come into Canada, they should all be living up to the same rules.
I think so. I agree. By the way, I used to assemble Chevrolets myself in Sainte Thérèse when I was a student. So I know about the vehicle assembly, but I think this is a very important issue. We have to look into that to make sure that I mean, not everybody, but qualified technicians can fix your vehicle, whatever the brand.
Yeah, no, and you've mentioned about a training program. I think that's where this budget could actually do some work, because there are some aftermarket progressive people, Bento from Bento Automotive in Toronto, and others that are actually doing some training. But there's no real electric training out there for many vehicle. And it's interesting. My friend has an electric vehicle, and Ford still tried to sell him oil changes. It's not the people, and they weren't trying to do anything improper. They just didn't have a skill set down into their sales department.
Yeah.
So that's changed. But any thoughts about how to roll out a program to accredit people and to in the aftermarket to provide that?
Actually, EMC, EMC's members working on putting together programs for whether it's at the high school level or the university level, the college level, because we will need to have more and more training and retraining. So that's something that EMC works on. I can tell you that we've had discussions with different colleges in Canada. So it's on its way, and Quebec is leading the way with BC. But I mean, there's a big future for colleges and universities and high schools for that.
Well, it's exciting news. It's a platinum age of auto is what I'm saying, because you look over where I'm from is Detroit, Michigan, just outside of that. We've it's unbelievable reinvestment into the electrification and in the process, and the aftermarket sometimes gets forgotten about, but I think it's important.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Madam
MP
Chair.
Massey. We'll now go to MP Baldinelli. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I just want to build on the comments of one of my colleagues earlier. And my question will probably be to Ms. Frank, building on the responses of Ms. Lloyd. I mean, two organizations, kind of similar issues, how we support small and medium-sized enterprises and the not-for-profits. And Ms. Frank, you had talked about your 743 organizations holding 17,000 events throughout the year and the importance to communities and so on. You had also mentioned your 4-point plan with regards to some of the things that can be done for a green recovery and supporting of that. I know in previous conversations that we've had, you've always raised the issue about how difficult it is, from the small kind of fairs and events and being those larger events, and the criteria sometimes doesn't apply. But have you had the opportunity to sit down in government and discuss those 4 criteria? I mean, and can you explain a little bit of sometimes that difficult criteria you face of, agriculture, sometimes it's heritage, and the difficulties you can to get your message on the needs of your sector?
Thank you so much for the question. First of all, in terms of the 4-point plan towards sustainability, because of COVID in particular over the past year, our priority has been more immediate support for the industry and looking into the next part of your question, actually, in that we don't fit into one federal department. That's always been our challenge. Our institutions, they're nonprofit, volunteer run, but they historically have been founded on agriculture and 4-H shows and animal competitions. They've grown to be pillars of tourism, community economic development, Canadian heritage. So we touch all of those departments in different ways. And because of that, we haven't found a home. Everyone keeps on batting us from one department to another. And that's been one of our biggest challenges in terms of getting support and ownership. And so the same thing, even in the context of sustainability and green initiatives, I would be fearsome, depending on where the initiatives go, that they wouldn't be accessible to us because we're not categorized in the right department. So we'll definitely be taking this 4-point plan forward in our conversations and hope that we are included in whatever proposals come out.
Thank you for that. No, and it kind of touched on some of the aspects which Miss Lloyd had also mentioned about the small and medium-sized enterprises and some of the programs that are more tailored for larger industries and the concerns about trying to get those to smaller businesses, which are just as important. And the notion, and you talk about your 743 organizations and the number of small and medium-sized enterprises that they will then build with and bring on to help support those events. But going to Ms. Lloyd now, I was interested in your comments and the notion of the lack of critical knowledge that is housed in these small and medium-sized enterprises. And so, are there any specific recommendations that you have for the federal government in terms of some of their funding support that can be provided to small and medium-sized enterprises, be it a tax credit, for example, to assist so that they can start developing those plans?
Absolutely. So tax credits would help. Incentive programs like I talked about before would help too to reduce some of the upfront capital costs. Even funding that's available to support, building those skills, professional development skills within the organizations. Some of the things that we hear, especially with COVID, is that the support that we provide through our green economy hubs is incredibly valuable to have that sort of touchstone and the availability of that knowledge externally to draw on. But the ability to afford membership fees even now in the COVID context is quite difficult. So any kind of incentives that actually allow those businesses to pay to access the kinds of supports, one example of which is what we provide, that actually help them figure out what to do, would be really useful. So, in funding envelopes, traditionally what's been there is projects are funded looking at sort of dollars per ton are reduced. What's the return that's going to be there? That metric doesn't really apply for a small business because you're not going to get the same sort of dollars per ton reduced as for a large organization. But in those projects, if part of what can be funded is actually eligible costs, could be to go towards, energy auditors or organizations that can help them understand what their footprint is and what to do next. That could really go a long way to fill that gap.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We will now go to MP Johari. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimonies here today. I'm going to continue with Ms. Lloyd. I understand that your group has recently launched a pilot project called SME Net Zero Pathways. Can you give us an update on this project? Where you are and what type of small businesses are you focusing? I got about 4,500 small businesses in my riding of Richmond Hill, which is part of the York region, and I have an array of different sectors in there, and I'm very much interested in getting to know about this pilot project and how I can help small businesses achieve that net zero goal that they have. So if you can expand on that, I would really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, as the federal government has set goals to be net zero by 2050, and there's a lot of talk about this, the pathways of how we're going to get there is still largely unknown. And, level down is the role that SMEs are going to play or how they're going to be impacted is also still being discovered. So the project that we're doing right now is a pilot with 10 manufacturers from across Ontario. And they're being supported right now with a technical study. Our partner is the Delphi Group as the consulting partner. And they're doing a technical study, understanding each business's operations and trying to figure out, based on their operations, what are the kinds of projects that they can implement and how far is that going to get us towards net zero? So what are the things in their control, funds available that they could implement? What's the business case for doing that? And then what are some of the broader changes that would need to happen from a policy perspective that could make a significant change to get us the rest of the way there, including technologies known or unknown that might need to come out in the next little while. So we're just in the process of finishing these technical studies. We're hosting a roundtable in June. Policymakers, the federal and provincial and municipal levels will be invited to share the findings and hear directly from the SME manufacturers. Any of you folks that are interested in attending that would be happy to give you an invitation. And the goal there would be to kind of understand the barriers and supports that SMEs face in transitioning to net zero. The Pembina Institute is also doing a broad scale policy scan, and their initial findings is that there are very few policies directly targeted at enabling SMEs to make this transition. So the goal of this kind of work is over this next year, we'll be releasing a report and doing a communications campaign, but to be able to take this project and then be able to scale that up. So to be able to go into manufacturing networks and be able to kind of tell manufacturers, here's what a roadmap looks like. Here are the things you can do. And by the way, here's the benefit to you to taking this on. And this kind of project can be replicated across different sectors. And it's possible because of, capacity building network-based initiatives like ours, which is what we're recommending we need to invest more in. So be happy to look at how to get more of businesses you're locally involved.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I got about a couple of minutes and I'd like to go to Mr. O'Callaghan. Mr. O'Callaghan, in your team's most recent article, Are We Building Back Better? Evidence from 2020 and Pathways for Inclusive Green Recovery Spending, you stated, and I quote, investment in green energy can deliver high economic multipliers, have high potential to crowd in private investment, and are an important step on the road to economy-wide decarbonization. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, I'll take each point as they come. On the short run and long run economic multipliers, the benefits of clean energy investment are that they can be quite job heavy in the short term. In being job heavy, so long as you're employing domestically skilled labor, you're able to keep a lot of that spending within the borders, and you don't, in that way, not very much capital flows outside. Additionally, if you have source materials locally available, i.e. the steel for your turbines or the solar cells in your panels, again, that investment can be kept domestic. The opportunity to crowd in private investment, I think, is quite pertinent in the Canadian context because you're a little bit more developed along the clean energy curve than some other countries, similar to here in the UK. A very, very, very small amount of investment can incentivize quite a big amount of private investment because it's just a small, there are just small hurdles left in making renewables competitive compared to other alternatives at the sort of shoulder points in the day in terms of energy supply. They're already competitive during the middle of the day. And I'm seeing a red flag, but yeah, I might have to stop there then. Sorry, Sherry.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we've just finished the second round, and I know we're a little over time, but I wanted to allow each party to have one more slot. So we'll go until 1:30, which will allow each party to have their time. So with that, we will go to Député Généreux. Vous avez 5 minutes.
The sound is back. Thank you. Earlier, in the statement, I saw a number of numbers. You were referring to revenue. This was for the manufacturing of and trucks, buses, school buses. From 2005 to 2015, in Canada, we haven't resolved the CO2 and greenhouse gases challenge, but the government hoped to attain 40% by 2030. Is it realistic? And you said, yes, it's feasible, but in 9 years. How can we succeed in doing in 9 years what we didn't succeed in doing in 15 years? With investments in Canadian businesses that are doing electrification of vehicles. I'm not the government, but there is a whole series of measures that should be put in place. I do believe it's feasible. Other countries have even more ambitious numbers compared to Canada. And let's say things straight. From an environment point of view, time is running out to save the environment. When the Conservative Party announced its climate program, when it talks about supporting electrification of vehicles and a ZEV approach and increase investments in electrical cars, there's one thing I would like to underscore. Ms. Lloyd mentioned this. The SMEs need support for electrification of transportation. It's difficult for them to get funding. Too often, the multinationals are assisted, but it's the SMEs that need the help. So, just like General Motors, 3 former students of McGill didn't find funding in Canada, went to the United States, got half a million. So this is the kind of thing that Canadian government needs to do something about. I'm an entrepreneur in printing and other areas. My company had been recognized in 2002 or 3, I can't remember what year exactly, as one of the first companies recycling 95% of the inputs. So we were already very much in the vanguard. SMEs as a whole can do a great deal to protect the environment. Now, of the barriers that SMEs face, what are they? Are they purely economic barriers? Or are they financial barriers?
Une question pour Madame Lloyd.
Is this a question for Ms. Lloyd? Yes, it is. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, so the upfront financial cost is a significant barrier, but I would say, what we're seeing is it's time. So they don't often have dedicated people in-house that focus on sustainability. These aren't skills that they initially had or were taught to do. And then the second thing is, in terms of what can actually be done, it's really hard to sort through all of the information about what is good to do, what are the right projects, and what makes sense for that business. So understanding, what are the actions that we can take and what makes sense to do now versus in the future? How is this going to change based on how my business, as my business is growing, how do I continue to, build in the right way so that I can continue my growth, but also reduce emissions? And then to make sense of all of the programs that exist, the programs don't last for long enough for businesses to know what's here and what's gone. So, finding a way to have, support intermediaries or bring that information together in a way that makes sense for that business with the bandwidth that they have is really important and something that's been missing.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the witnesses. Thank you, Chair.
We will now go to MB Lambropoulos. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank all of the witnesses who have given us all of this information today. It's a really interesting panel and great discussion. So one of my first questions is going to go to Ms. Powell and Mr. Baker. You guys spoke about not only building back greener, but building back more equitably and making sure that everybody gets to benefit from the economy going forward. And you did talk about different ways that the federal government can help us do this with making sure that there are policies that when writing up contracts, these things are part of the contract and making sure that this is accounted for. And then you also mentioned that it's a huge ecosystem, right? And so there are contractors and subcontractors who don't necessarily have contracts with the federal government, but who are a little bit, not directly in contact with us. So what types of ways do you think the federal government can kind of, I guess, with regards to not necessarily direct contracts, how can we influence this and make sure that everybody's included in the economy going forward?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think like in terms of building up community benefit policies, making sure that at the very least that there is reporting going back into the general contractors from the subs in terms of how they are performing in relations to those equity targets. We do understand a lot of the portion of the work does happen within subcontractors, and so one of the things that we've been trying to do is doing more education within subcontractors, and making sure that that information is very clear and presented. And that's a lot of work that's taken on by community. And so as TCBN, we are actively, as part of like all of the current projects that we're involved in, like the Eglinton Crosstown LRT with Metrolinx, we do have an active working group that meets quarterly And so we make sure that these general contractors who are at the table as part of these working groups are regularly reporting back into their subcontractors, presenting information around the targets that they need to meet, and working collaboratively to be able to achieve that. I don't think it can be left to sort of one specific sector. I think it's important to have all parties at the table and who are regularly meeting to monitor and to make sure that those goals are being achieved. And so that's an approach that a collaborative approach that we support, and it does take investment. And so organizations like Toronto Community Benefits Network, who are doing this work, we definitely need that type of support. And we have seen additional increases, through the budget recently to help support with more sort of this sort of workforce development planning to make sure that we're reaching those objectives.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Lloyd, you spoke about the barriers that small businesses face when trying to reach that zero emission target as well. And so there's actually a company in my riding called ERA, and what they do is they work with companies in order to help them reach these targets and in order to help them become more environmentally friendly. And this obviously, helps businesses because, like you said, they may not necessarily know on their own how to go greener, but when an outside company comes in and does their assessment and makes sure that, so that's one way that I think people and companies can benefit and can go forward by hiring an outside expert. And obviously, if they had money from the government to pay for these types of assessments, that would be beneficial. I know you already kind of covered this, but if you can go over, some of the obstacles that small businesses face and why they're not necessarily jumping on board, even though it's the popular thing to do and it's the right thing to do.
Yes, for sure. So, I mean, to the point there about existing support. So, I think one of the barriers to that the businesses face that I didn't share is that right now they're not being well served by the private sector. So, consultants are often very expensive for small businesses to afford, and they're great to go deep on a particular area, but there's not sort of that broad ranging support that's available. Um, in terms of why they're not making more progress, so there's a couple of different factors. One is just that in terms of the incentives externally, consumers' willingness to pay for products that are greener, or raw material inputs that cost more, for example, to manufacture. The playing field hasn't yet been there. So I think anything that the government can do to align those market incentives so that organizations that are doing things the right way can be rewarded in the marketplace would be a good thing.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Député Lemire. Vous avez 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Chair. I want to continue with Mr. Breton. You had talked about the importance of establishing a strategy for the electrification of transport and to have the charging stations and the desire to significantly increase the electrification of fleets, government fleets and crown corporations. Yes, contrary to what many people think that electric cars will be used only in the cities, but as soon as you have a suburb or an outlying region, electric cars, are not a good thing. Well, I live in an outlying region, and the majority of charging is done at home, so it's easy to install at a home. But there's a bigger challenge in downtowns, Montreal, Toronto, Quebec City, Calgary, in office towers or big apartment buildings. When someone lives on the 10th floor, will they have access to a charging station? That's more difficult. So that's why you need a plan for downtown areas. For now, that is a big issue. I think there's pillars to make progress, more charging stations, more education, both for consumers and workers, because there are lots of myths circulating about electric cars and electrification of transport in general. We also need more discounts. You need parity. You need electric vehicles to be accessible. And, and I'm also talking about, pickups and other type vehicles because a majority of them won't be eligible for government funding. So that's regional inequities. If an owner needs, a pickup for work, it'd be unfair not to be entitled to the same kind of incentives. So we consider it essential for there be equitable access to incentivization if you're going to have adoption of electric vehicles. Just like in California, you have 12 U.S. governors who asked the U.S. President Joe Biden to put in place a new federal incentives. So should the government make an example by electrifying its own fleet? Sorry, Mr. Lemire, your time is out. I regret.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Lloyd, do we almost need like an ISO standard for small, medium-sized businesses and supports for them? I get your point because many of them they don't have in-house human resources, they don't have in-house or accountants or lawyers. So trying to take advantage of some of the government programs are very difficult. So, but would it make sense to do some type of standardization and then incentivize that standardization and make it available to the different SMEs?
Standardization in terms of supports or just in terms of what is required for businesses to green their operations?
Both, actually. Yeah, because one doesn't work without the other because it just spins out of control.
Yeah, so I think, there was an article published in the Globe and Mail recently about the need to have more consistency in how businesses in general, whether they're small businesses or not, are defining what getting to net zero means. There's right now not even consistency there in terms of how organizations are using offsets, for example, versus true reductions, and whether they're just focusing directly on their own operations or they're also targeting emissions from their value chain. So I think in general, as part of Canada's transition strategy to get to net zero, there does need to be more consistency and definition of what we mean by that. And the pathways are going to look different for different industries. Pathways are also going to look different for different sizes of business. So I think anything that on the whole would allow us to have a discussion where we're all sort of talking about the same thing, and anything that provides more focus on the needs of small business and especially what they need, it's been lacking, is going to be helpful as we think about this transition, especially given that small and medium-sized businesses make up 99% of our economy. And we know that having a strong economy is going to be really important. We need to figure out how to transition the bulk of the economy to get there.
Thanks. Real quickly over to the Toronto Community Benefit Network. The United States actually has guaranteed percentages for federal contracts and regional expectations that actually does follow up. Is that similar to what you're questioning? Is a model, but maybe not exactly like that, but one with accountability drawn into the contracts that can be measured later on and actually have specific regional and localized results that can measure the results of the minority groups that are actually identified as being deficient in the economy and then getting support later on and getting real results from that activity of the federal money.
You are absolutely correct. That's exactly what we're looking for. For community benefits, you must have targets and baseline understanding of where we're at and a target for where we want to go and a continuous intentional process to actually get there. And this needs to be in the contract with the contractors.
Thank you for that.
You're
I wish
right.
I had more time for Mr. Breton. There's a bunch of incentive programs that have been out there. The Eco Auto Fee-Bait, which was put in place, and as well the Pacific incentive that wasn't provided. So thanks, Madam Chair, but there's lots of good stuff.
Thank you so much. And with that, that is our time today. I do want to thank the witnesses for their excellent testimony and for your patience today with us. And I want to offer to the witnesses, if you would like to, if there's anything that you did not get to share with the committee today that you think would be important, if you'd like to submit a brief to the clerk, feel free to send it directly to the clerk. He'll make sure that that it's translated in both official languages and circulated to the committee because you may have not had a chance to get all of what you wanted on the record. With that, I'd like to thank MPs again for your patience and of course to the folks in the room that make everything that we do possible. Merci infiniment au service de TI, de traduction.
Thanks to the interpretation services and all the support staff in the committee room. Thanks for your hard work.
Thank you, everyone.
See.